Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about more Space Marine chapters as we get into the Lamenters. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions, please comment down below. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Lamenters Space Marine chapter. The Lamenters are an unfortunate loyalist chapter of the Space Marines, who perhaps more than any other chapter of the present era, seem to have been cursed by a dark shadow that has long determined their fate. The Lamenters were raised during the cursed 21st founding of the Space Marine chapters, in the 36th millennium. The matter of the curse pertaining to the exact nature of this founding has long since become shrouded in secrecy and myth. Many consider those chapters created under this label of the cursed founding as tainted from their very creation. The Lamenters are believed to have been created from the Blood Angel's gene seed, genetically modified by the Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests on Mars, to remove the effect of the Blood Angel's flaw, known as the Black Rage and Red Thirst. The Astartes of the Lamenters chapter are noted to suffer from a kind of mental melancholy, although it is unclear if this is due to some unexpected flaw in their gene seed, or if this is simply the result of the unfortunate events that have repeatedly befallen the chapter. Although the chapter is made up of those few Astartes descended from Sanguinius to be spared from the Red Thirst, the mark of that flaw was still upon the Lamenters in the eyes of their fellow Space Marines, many of whom chose to shun the chapter, regardless of their undoubtable loyalty to the Emperor of Mankind and his Imperium. During the early 37th millennium, matters worsened for the Imperium as corrupted Astartes of the 21st founding and other descendant forces rose up against the rule of the Emperor in a series of bloody wars and purges. The Lamenters chose to depart to the Imperium's fringes, rather than risk conflict with their fellow Astartes of the 21st founding. They used their mobility as a fleet-based chapter to crusade against the enemies without, rather than become ensnarled in the quagmire of civil conflict within the Imperium. For the next millennium and a half, the Lamenters would remain on a continuous crusade, conducting many campaigns against the various Xeno races that plagued mankind across the western reach of the galaxy. Often the chapter was recorded as intervening to aid isolated Imperial worlds under threat. Despite their record of honorable victories and valiant defenses of the Imperium's far-flung domains, the specter of misfortune seemed to dog them at every turn. Dark rumors began to grow and surround them as time and again the chapter suffered from bitter reversals and dark turns of fate. Even when they were recalled into the interior of the Imperium, along with a number of other crusading chapters by the High Lords of Terra, to help deal with the rising threat of incursion from the Eye of Terror, many Imperial commanders and other Space Marine chapters continued to view them with suspicion. The Lamenters' reputation often worked against them, but rarely with such consequences as during the Chaos attack on the high world of Corellia. During the Ninth Black Crusade, the superstitious-bound Mortifactors chapter refused to fight alongside the Lamenters, abandoning the planet rather than serving beside them. The Lamenters were unwilling to desert the Corellian population, holding out alone against the warbands of the Black Legion for 6 weeks, suffering horrendous losses until the Ultramarines and White Scars led a battle group that broke through the Chaos Warfleet's blockade to relieve Corellia. The Lamenters chapter had been reduced to barely 200 surviving Astartes by the time they were relieved by their fellow Space Marines. The Lamenters were deemed lost when their fleet disappeared into a warp storm soon afterwards, only to reappear more than a century later on the edge of the Segmentum Solar, having slowly battled their way back from the outer void. Once again, the Lamenters returned to full strength after slowly rebuilding their fleet and chapter ranks. They now operated as a crusade force near the galactic core, and were soon requested by the High Lords of Terra to form part of the defenses of a sorely pressed Maelstrom Zone, as one of the chapters that served as a Maelstrom Wardens. Their duties were to patrol the wide expanse of the desolate wastes of the Maelstrom's western zones, responding to and neutralizing chaotic and piratical threats as they were encountered, a duty the chapter took with great fervor. During this time, the Lamenters became close allies with the Astro Claws, who had the strategic command of the Maelstrom Zone, and fought alongside them in many of their greatest battles. The Astro Claws chapter, under its last chapter master, Huron, offered the Lamenters a degree of honor and respect they seldom received before from their fellow Astartes, as well as war materials with which to build and maintain the chapter's strength. It would be this friendship the Lamenters were so unaccustomed to, and the ties of blood split in battle alongside the Astro Claws, that would ultimately prove to be the chapter's undoing. The power armor of the Lamenters was originally bright yellow except for a red helmet stripe and the right shoulder plate, which was decorated with white and black checks, upon which rested the chapter's badge, a bleeding heart. The most recent chapter colors included a Mark VII Aquila pattern power armor scheme that darkens the Lamenters' armor to a mustard yellow, and transferred the chapter badge, the check pattern, to the left shoulder plate. The helmet stripe was dropped completely. The Lamenters' chapter badge is a bleeding heart against the background of a black and white checkerboard pattern. It appears that the Lamenters' gene seed may have been tampered with during its creation process by the Adeptus Mechanicus. The full extent of the modification performed during its creation on Mars was likely kept concealed even from the High Lords of Terra and other Adeptus Astartes chapter masters of that day, a theory easily given weight by the political turmoil and division that was rife throughout the Imperium during that time. It is also likely that the experimental procedures performed on the Lamenters' gene seed during its creation were done with at least their successor chapter tactical approval, for the Blood Angels have long sought an answer to their dual afflictions of the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. The goal of reducing the effect of the flaw were partially successful, and those records that remain concerning the 21st founding indicate that the numbers of Lamenters chapter Astartes succumbing to the Red Thirst over the centuries have been very small. It was quickly noted that certain idiosyncrasies of the mind and temperament developed within the Lamenters, factors that only grew more pronounced as the years passed. A dark melancholy seemed to take hold of the chapter's soul, and it was said amongst their fellow scions of Sanguinius that the Lamenters bore the grief of their Primarch's death more nearly than any other Blood Angel successor chapter. Whatever the truth of this ill fortune had already begun to follow the Lamenters like an unwanted shadow. As the years passed, there had been a continued and observable increase both in the Lamenters prone for melancholy and in the frequency which with the Red Thirst affects Lamenters Astartes. By some reports, the Blood Angel's flaws have been worsening to varying degrees in all Blood Angel successor chapters. It remains to be seen whether the Lamenters will survive long enough to see this and to begin recruiting new neophytes to replace their steep losses to High Fleet Kraken. The Lamenters remain at their heart a Blood Angel successor chapter, heir to the glorious and unique martial traditions and brutally effective art of war practiced by the sons of Sanguinius. They adhere to the basic tenets of the Codex Astartes. Like all their fellow scions of Sanguinius, there is a very great deal of fluidity between the companies, and they very rarely fight in full cohesion, except the 10th Scout Company, whose members have yet to complete their training and become full Astartes. Chapter recruitment was also carried out on a practical basis, with likely aspirants brought forth from the feudal worlds and far-flung colonies from wherever the chapter's fleet roving course took it. The Lamenters' order of battle favored shock assault tactics, often delivered through a close air assault utilizing the chapter's Thunderhawk and Storm Raven gunships. In terms of operational equipment and insignia, the Lamenters lean more towards the standard use of the Space Marines than their Blood Angel forebearers and their fellow Blood Angel successor chapters, although it may be more of a matter of ease of resupply and maintenance for a fleet-based chapter with no home port that is forced to rely largely on its own artificers. Chapter does retain a few cherished examples of sanguinary relics, but aside from their large numbers of air units, heavy tanks such as Land Raiders and Battle Predators are less common within the Lamenters than any of the other Blood Angel successors, while suits of Terminator armor are particularly rare in the Lamenter armory and are valued beyond price by the chapter. As with their forebearers, the Lamenters chaplains operate as a part of their overall chapter command, rather than subordinates to it in each company, as is the case with the Codex-compliant chapters. This enables the chaplains to watch over the growing problems of the Red Thirst in the chapter's ranks, while the Sanguinary Priesthood holds a particularly prominent role and is known by the Lamenters as the Calyx. It has often been observed that it is the Calyx that has had the greatest part in holding the chapter together through its many rituals and misfortunes, as the apothecaries of the Lamenters tend not only to the physical health of the chapter's Astartes, but also to the spiritual stigmata they bear. On the field, the Lamenters first became involved in the Aculus Crusade when the chapter provided an escort to the rogue trader Kazendus Lan, settling a 1,000-year honored debt to the dynasty. The 4 squads of the escort fought alongside the rogue trader's own vessel regiments for a decade, and undertook a number of highly effective boarding actions against the arch-enemy warships in the Outer Reach. In the 812th year of the 41st millennium, the vessel on which the Lamenters were traveling suffered a catastrophic drive failure during real space translation, forcing it to be abandoned on the outskirts of the Phalon's Lament system. Only a handful of battle brothers survived the accident. Learning of the tragedy and recognizing the survivors' limited application as a conventional force, Watch Commander Mordigale of the Death Watch sought them out and introduced their service into the Long Vigil. The bulk of the surviving Lamenters in the Jericho Reach have formed a single kill team under the Watch Captain Brand Mac Lyer of the Storm Warden chapter, while several more serve in the other cells alongside the Battle Brothers of the other chapters. The latest campaign the Lamenters have fought in was in the 993rd year of the 41st millennium. After the Lamenters engaged High Fleet Kraken, there was barely 3 companies worth of Battle Brothers surviving. The Red Hunters chapter suffered losses too, for the task force assigned to track the Lamenters on their century-long penitent crusade, by orders of the Senatorum Imperialis, also had to make a stand against the High Fleet. Lamenters are well known for fighting in the Corinth Crusade. At the outset of the Corinth Crusade, the Ultramarines called for allies to aid them in their holy task of destroying the mighty Orc empires of the Caridon region of the eastern fringe of the galaxy. The Lamenters answered the Ultramarines chapter master Marnius Calgar's call, mindful of the ancient debt they believed they owed the Ultramarines for their intervention many years before during the disastrous siege of Corellia. They dispatched a task force of 300 Astartes, along with the battle barge Daughter of Tempests and her escorts, to serve in the Corinthian Crusade. The Lamenters persecuted the crusade tirelessly, driving back the Greenskin menace in a series of campaigns and separate battles throughout the sector. It was the liberation of the world of Slaughterhouse 3 that proved a decisive turning point for the chapter in the campaign. This Orc mining world had hundreds of thousands of human slaves funneled into its mines, never to return again. Moved by their plight, the Lamenters petitioned the Crusade Command for the task of attacking Slaughterhouse 3, which Calgar reluctantly agreed to, with the proviso that he could grant no further support for the Lamenters' mission. The Lamenters slipped through the Orcs' line and quickly obliterated their orbital defenses, and then quickly swept away any organized greenskin resistance in a remorseless assault. Seeing their brutal captors cast down, the prisoners rose up and joined the fray. In a few hours, the planet was in the Lamenters' hands. But their victory had unforeseen problems. They had liberated 3 million human prisoners, who now looked to their saviors to deliver them from the hands of their enemies, reluctant to leave the prisoners behind, and unable to transport them away from the planet. The Lamenters resolved to fight, and if need be, die nobly while any chance remained. Their tech marines desperately trying to restore the captured Orc starships to operational flight status. The single battle barge and less than 200 surviving Lamenters stood against the nightmarish odds as a wave of Orc starships and phytobombers attacked, only to be beaten back by the Lamenters' savagery. Unprecedented number of Lamenters succumbed to the Black Rage in their bloody struggle. The freed slaves took it upon themselves to end the impasse after a last prayer of thanks to the Emperor they signaled the Lamenters' battle barge and requested a merciful death, knowing that at least they would die as free men and women, rather than pawns of the bestial greenskins. With another orc fleet massing for the attack, the Lamenters had no choice and granted the former slaves the Emperor's peace by detonating a series of hundreds of seismic charges that had been honeycombed through the Slaughterhouse 3's mines and collapsing the tunnels. The explosions laid Slaughterhouse 3 to waste within minutes, creating one of the largest planetary tombs in Imperial history. With fewer than 100 battle brothers left standing, the battered but unbowed Daughters of Tempests escaped the slaughterhouse system, trailing a handful of converted orc slave transports, carrying with them less than a tenth of the liberated slaves. In operational terms, the liberation of the orc mining world had been a resounding success. The destruction of the mines had set back the orcs' buildup of war material by years and caused conflicts amongst the various orc clans, vying for the SAR system's mineral wealth. The Lamenters' success was only shadowed by the unfortunate losses incurred in the battle's aftermath, yet their victory tasted like bitter ashes to the Lamenters. When offered the honor of the Iron Halo in reward for their efforts for Marneus Calgar, the Lamenters took the almost unprecedented step of refusing this esteemed chapter honor. This caused some of their Imperial allies to accuse them of deliberately insulting the Crusade's commander, further breeding suspicion and dark rumor among those already ill-disposed toward the chapter. Prior to the liberation of Slaughterhouse 3, the Lamenters took part in a combined Space Marine force, led by the Ultramarines under the command of Chapter Master Marneus Calgar, which consisted of the elements of the Angels of Absolution, Marine Urat, and the Silver Skulls. During a 7-year-long Imperial Crusade, the forces inflicted a series of major defeats on the Orc Empire of Cheredon, which delayed the invasion of the Imperium by the Wa Argluk for 30 standard years. During the final century of the 41st millennium, the Lamenters became involved in the Badab War as allies of the secessionist Astroclaws, Mantis Warriors, and Executioners. By the 908th year of the 41st millennium, the Lamenters had suffered significant losses through attrition. The continuous deployment defending the southern Badab sector, as well as serving as escort duty for the many secessionist supply convoys, had taken its toll on these fleet-based chapters. Yet they were still to be a force to be reckoned with, and so the Loyalists put a plan in action to isolate them and take them out one by one. The ferocious Minotaur chapter gathered its forces to strike where it would be most effective. Their opportunity finally came when the location of the Lamenters chapter barrack, Mater Lacrimium, was discovered in orbit over the feral world of Optera, taking on supplies. The Minotaurs launched a lightning attack and succeeded in catching it and crippling its main drives, preventing it from fleeing. The Lamenters were forced to defend their chapter's barrack at all costs, as it contained both their recovering battle casualties as well as their precious resource of gene seed. With the continual attack on the barrack, the majority of the Lamenters' fleets were drawn back to the system. Once there, the Minotaurs laid bloody siege for 17 standard hours of brutal ship-to-ship fighting. Though the Minotaurs suffered heavy casualties, they eventually overpowered the Lamenters by virtue of their brutality and sheer weight of numbers. Their forces shattered, the few remaining Lamenters were forced to surrender rather than risk the annihilation of their precious barrack. The majority of their fleet was left ruined or drifting in the void. The Minotaurs claimed salvage rights to the crippled Lamenters' fleet, and the war gear of the fallen to replace their own serious losses. The surviving Lamenters were incarcerated on a prison hulk orbiting a night side of Saga II, amid rumors of their growing insanity and confinement. Only 311 Lamenters battle brothers survived to be interned on the prison hulk orbiting Sagan for the rest of the war. Less than 100 Lamenters were deployed elsewhere during the fight that still remained out in space. The chapter's severe losses effectively removed them from the secessionist order of battle. Not long after, inquisitorial missions were sent to the homeworlds of the Mantis Warriors and the Executioners, but no separate mission was dispatched to contact the Lamenters. Whatever findings the Inquisition uncovered from the Lamenters chapter barrack after the battle remained sealed, even from the knowledge of the inquisitorial reports made available to the Segmentum conclaves at that time. 1 year after the death of Badab Primaris and the end of the war, in the 913th year of the 41st millennium, the remaining secessionists from the Astroclaws, Executioners, Mantis Warriors, and the Lamenters chapter were put on trial before a special court of their peers of the Adeptus Astartes. The very existence of this chapter was at stake. Despite the attempts of the Inquisitor Legate to have the matter placed under full inquisitorial control, a conclave of 5 Space Marine chapter masters, whose forces were not part of the conflict, were convened in judgment in accordance with Astarte tradition. The court found that all of the chapters who had taken part in the Badab secession, guilty in breaking both the Codex Astarte and the ancient covenant with the Emperor that it represented. The Lamenters had not rebelled against the Imperium out of treachery or following a turn of chaos, but because of pride. They saw the attacks by the Inquisition on the Astroclaws as infringing upon the traditionary autonomy of the Maelstrom Wardens and the Adeptus Astartes. The Lamenters were eventually granted forgiveness for their actions by the High Lords of Terra, and were required, like their fellow secessionists, to undertake a 100-year-long penitent crusade to atone for their transgression, and would have to do so without the right to recruit neophytes to replace their losses during the time of punishment. Their future survival would therefore be left in their own hands and to the grace and benevolence of the Emperor. After the Lamenters participated in the Badab War, their chapter banner was a tattered remnant. When they were granted the Emperor's forgiveness, the banner was given to the Adeptus Sororitas to be repaired and purified. The sisters' handiwork was said to be inspired by the Emperor, and it is said that they wept as they wove, contemplating the Emperor's greatest sacrifice for humanity at the end of the Horus Heresy. The banner became an artifact known as the Banner of Tears, and was taken with the Lamenters on their subsequent crusade. Unfortunately, the Lamenters seemed to carry their bad luck with them, as their penitent crusade led them straight into the path of the Tyranids' High Fleet Kraken. Although they were instrumental in slowing the advance of this terrible alien menace, the Lamenters took devastating losses. In one particular notable battle, a number of Lamenters Spacemarines fought a heroic last stand on the planet of Malbolion, which was being rapidly consumed by the Tyranid organisms. The actions of the Lamenters allowed for many Imperial citizens to escape the doomed world, but they lost their lives in the process. As a result of the horrific losses suffered in their many battles with the Tyranids, barely 4 whole companies of the Lamenters still remain, while they are prevented from recruiting new neophytes because of their continual Penance crusade. Whether the chapter will survive long enough to begin recruiting once more, or will have its banner and badge entered into the hallway of heroes in the Inner Imperial Palace on Terra, remains to be seen. Malachim Foros is the chapter master of the Lamenters, and is also known as the Lord of Ruin and the Watcher of the Deeps. Foros is a living example of both his brethren's grief and their resilience. Malachim Foros earned the moniker Lord of Ruin after the palpable aura of grief and bitter hatred that surrounded him, filling his followers with near-suicidal determination, and filling the hearts of their enemies with despair. A figure of awe and reverence for his chapter, his battle brothers would follow him into fire and death without a second thought. To a casual observer, the Lamenters chapter master is like a statue of an ancient imperial saint given life, due to his fair face and ancient gold power armor. Beneath his calm exterior lay a bitter emptiness and an indomitable will that he uses to maintain his self-control, to keep the darkness within at bay. There were whispers that his control was slipping, and that he had already nearly been swallowed by the Black Rage several times, only to pull himself back from the brink through his sheer force of will. A survivor of the ill-fated destruction of the Space Hulk Unhallowed Heart, Malachim Foros had long held a distrust of the bureaucrats of the Adeptus Terra, after the castigation of his chapter, and the centuries of distrust they had faced. It was this flaw that had proved to be the Lamenters' downfall, when Huron exploited his anger and suspicion to gain their support for the Badab secession and the tyrant's cause. Malachim Foros was believed slain during the destruction of the battle barge Daughter of Tempests during the Battle of Optera in the 908th year of the 41st millennium, when the Minotaur's chapter battered the Lamenters into submission. Since the end of the Badab War in the 912th year of the 41st millennium, certain rumors have persisted that Foros somehow survived, floating unseen in the wreckage to be eventually recovered and join his brethren in exile, though these rumors have yet to be substantiated. Another notable lamenter is Brother Semnai. Semnai was serving his second vigil of the Long Watch at the time of a notable operation, his first spent as a kill marine in the Corinth Expanse. The exact nature of Brother Semnai's service in that far distant region of the galaxy remains a mystery, as it appears he traveled on the bridges of as many as a dozen different rogue trader vessels. Many suspect Brother Semnai has been tasked with hunting down a specific enemy of the Death Watch in the Corinth Expanse, and that he finally cornered that unknown foe on the very brink of the Hector Rift. Other than the fact that Brother Semnai discharged his oath during the final battle, all that is known is that he sought to return to his chapter's homeworld, his vessel laying up at Jericho during its long voyage. Needless to say, Brother Semnai never completed the journey, deciding instead to stand a second vigil after the Inquisitor Ramius approached him and specifically requested his aid in some undisclosed task. Brother Semnai served during the Hadex Anomaly operation, and the reason for his continual internment in the Jericho Reclusium is a complete mystery. The Lamenter's dreadnought Amadeus Chirophelius, now known as Chiron, avoided the ultimate fate of the Lamenters at the hands of High Fleet Kraken due to being temporarily assigned to the Ordo Xenos Death Watch, and he currently believes himself to be the last surviving member of his chapter. The Lamenters' relics include the Victory Price. Victory's Price was a master-crafted Astarte power spear. Bearing this power spear is viewed as both a great honor and a heavy burden by the warriors of the Lamenters chapter. It has been wielded at the forefront of many great victories and mighty battles. More of its wielders have fallen in the moment of triumph than have lived to return to the chapter's halls. Though the Adeptus Astarte know no fear, the wielder of this spear tend to become concerned with ensuring that they will sell their life as dearly as possible when the time comes to pay for their success. The Glaven and Carmin is a two-handed mastercrafted power weapon in the form of a powerful Glaven, once wielded by Chapter Master Malachim Foros during the Badab War era. The Catechist was an ancient Infernus pistol used by Chapter Master Malachim Foros in battle during the Badab War era. The Ordos Pronatus is one of the Ordo Minoris of the Adeptus Sororitas, who specializes in retrieving, guarding, studying, and repairing artifacts of value to the Ecclesiarchy. They also have the responsibility of maintaining and blessing the many banners and symbols of the Ordo Militant. They have been even called upon to reconsecrate the livery of other imperial bodies, as was the case when they repaired the chapter banner of the formerly disgraced Lamenters chapter after its involvement in the Badab Uprising. As we spoke about in part 2 of the Lamenters chapter video, it is said that the Sisters Protanis, who repaired the banner, wept openly as they did so. So terrible to contemplate were the sins of the Lamenters. To this day, the standard is known as the Banner of Tears. At the outset of the Badab War, the Lamenters were known to possess the massive mobile star fortress called the Mater Lacrimarum, which served as their chapter's mobile fortress monastery and repair dock, 2 Adeptus Mechanicus forge ships, and a dozen other support vessels. The chapter also possessed 2 unusually powerful battle barges, 6 strike cruisers, and 3 Vanguard-class cruisers, as well as 22 escorts of various classes. The Lamenters' current fleet after being engaged by High Fleet Kraken, is unknown at this time. Mater Lacrimarum is a mighty vessel, a mobile Imperial Star Fortress known as a chapter barrack. It serves as the Lamenters Chapter Mobile Fortress Monastery and Geed Seed Relic Repository. The battle barge Daughter of Tempests served during the Corinth Crusade. The vessel was taken as a prize by the Minotaur chapter during the Badab War. The Mater Suspiria was boarded by the Astartes of the Minotaur chapter during the Badab War. The assault force that struck the strike cruiser included the Contemptor pattern dreadnought Hecton Iacos. Reclusiarch Ivanus and Commi of the Minotaur chapter led a victorious boarding assault in the 908th year of the 41st millennium against the Dawn Reaper during the Battle of the Badab War. To learn more about the Minotaurs chapter, please check out our 40 Facts video on the Minotaurs chapter. And those were 40 facts on the Lamenters Spacemarine chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, share it with your friends and thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.